Hey everybody, welcome back to the newest episode of the Pixelists podcast. I'm Will, that's Blake. We're here to talk about all the nerdy things we love. And today, that's the finale of Exandria Unlimited Calamity. I'm not ready, man. I don't think I'm ready. I haven't really processed it still.
I'm still processing it, and I've watched it like 4 times. I've watched it so many times. I'm watching it again tonight because my wife hasn't seen it yet. So
nice. Are you on the finale? I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Liking it?
She's loved it. Yeah, we've watched the first half of this 4th episode, and then we have kids, so we can't like do a 6.5 hour block. So we watched the first half. We have 3 hours left. I've separately watched the episode, like I said, 4 or 5 times now. And then she's also gone back and watched the first half with some of the things we'll talk about in our recap today.
Ooh, baby.
So she's rewatched a lot of that first half too. So
it's just, I mean, it bears multiple watchings. It's just so good. I mean, I'll try not to start goozing on it at this point because we still got to jump into things. But
this is probably going to be a long episode today, I'm guessing. There's a lot to talk about.
There really is. Yeah. And
yeah. Which, if you guys are watching and you've made it this far, hopefully you're here for the journey of all the amazingness that is EXU Calamity. And would love for you guys to jump into the comments also and tell us what you thought of the series overall, especially this episode, some of your theories from there. There's been some really cool discussions on implications of this episode. And if you just randomly stumbled across this current episode and you're thinking like, what's EXU Calamity? You got to stop right here and you need to go to the Critical Role YouTube channel and watch it from episode 1, because we'll talk about this in our recap today, but it was truly special to watch this 4-part series, which I'll say more about that once we're done with the recap. But yeah,
agreed.
Quick announcement. Yeah. Also, unless you had something else you were going to say.
No, go ahead.
SGDQ next week,
bro. So excited, man.
If you're not familiar with SGDQ, it is, and I think this one is Doctors Without Borders. Is that right?
I actually always forget which is which. It's either that or the Prevent Cancer Foundation.
Right. I think this one's Doctors Without Borders. But okay. So basically, if you guys aren't familiar with the GDQ event series, so basically it stands for Games Done Quick. And twice a year, they do it once in the winter, once in the summer. They do a week-long speed run of retro and even current games. And so if you're not familiar with speed running, just envision that game that you spent like 30, 40 hours on and it like enraptured you. You're going to watch someone beat it in like 8 minutes, which once you finally watch it happen, you're just like, this is insane. So it's a charity event they run. It's a week long, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and nonstop.
All proceeds go to this event goes to Doctors Without Borders, and they raise about $3 million when they run this event. So it's pretty freaking gnarly and awesome, and definitely it's something Will and I have enjoyed for many years now. So check that out. I know, Will, you don't typically like to look at the schedule.
I haven't yet. Have you already taken a peek?
I haven't. I'm going to as soon as we're done today. So maybe in the comments with a spoiler tag, you can let us know what game you're most excited for. That's available. The schedule is at gamesdonequick.com. So I'm sure we'll do a video of some kind about that.
Yeah, and if you're interested in more, we actually did. So what was this Sunday is the start of Summer Games Done Quick. So for the last awesome Games Done Quick, which was this winter, Blake and I actually did a quick little video kind of explaining what it was. So feel free to check that out on the channel. But what I'm super excited about for this one in particular is it's back to being in person. So for the last like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 of these marathons, they've all been remote because of COVID. And this is the first one back to like the status quo. So I'm really excited to like, even I'm not going or anything, but just to like have everyone back to normal. So extra hype for this one coming up Sunday.
Yeah. And I think that's all the announcements, right?
Yeah, I think so as well. Yeah.
So if you aren't familiar with their channel, what we like to do is a brief recap of what happened in the episode, especially if an episode's several hours long, which this one was just over 6 hours.
Yeah.
We do our best to do just a quick recap in case you had to watch it over multiple sittings, in case you missed a detail. We'll do a recap for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we will talk about our reactions to the episode. So we also pull that recap out entirely. So if you're watching just the recap itself, click the link below. You can go to our whole video discussion. And again, we want to hear what you thought of the episode. So let us know in the comments your thoughts. I'm pretty sure I'm first half, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just
what if I was like, I'm first half?
Yeah. Tickets or the sandwiches. All that to say, let's talk about what frickin' happened on episode 4 of EXU Calamity. And if you remember this episode, the previous episode ended with Laren casting Blight on the Tree of Names. It's sundering up the seam with fire. It's splitting open with Vespin stepping through into our world, and presumably the Lord of the Hells, Asmodeus, not far behind. This episode opens up with a time stop spell going out, and additionally a spell known as Disjunction. It's an old 3E spell that basically disassembles and destroys your magical items. So Britain has every person roll a wisdom saving throw, and if they can pass the check, I think it was a 20, maybe a 23, I can't remember. If they can pass the check, they get to keep that magical item. If they fail the check, they take a lot of damage, I think 25, 26 points of damage per item, and the item is permanently destroyed, gone. So everybody rolls. Some were more lucky than others. I think Nidus only had one item get destroyed. Paisha had like almost every item except for her staff get destroyed, which we found out after the fact that if the staff had been destroyed, it would have been like an atomic bomb that killed everyone.
Yeah.
Of note, Xerxes only has his shield destroyed, and then his sword, his Holy Avenger, doesn't get destroyed. It corrodes into nothingness, similar to the solar bow from episode 1. Laren, I think, has her Ring of Protection destroyed, but is mostly okay. And then Sam's character, Loquacious, fails every single item except for one that he rolls a natural 20 on. It is the portable spell slot that Laren had gifted him in the previous episode. He rolls a natural 20. It's the only item that saves. From this explosion, Paisha's knocked out. I think Loquacious and Nidus are close to being knocked out. But right after this disjunction spell, there's also this, Brennan calls it a fireball. We don't know if it's an actual fireball spell or just like the explosion of the portal opening. But essentially what happens is everyone takes like 70 to 80 fire and force damage. It knocks out Nidus, knocks out Xerxes, knocks out Loquacious. Laren gets knocked outside of the room through the door, outside of the time stop spell, and Paisha is killed. She actually dies from this spell. What then it goes from there is we see Laren is going to, outside of the time stop spell, she basically is like, well, my friends are dead, and she's going to dimension door away to a private viewing room where she's seeing like a feed of what's happening on Dwemer, her little automaton or automaton robot who's down in the room. And this is all happening under a second. Basically, we have death saving rolls that go out. Loquacious is going to fail. He's going to roll 2 6s and also takes a death save or death fail from the damage as well. Loquacious dies. Nidus is eventually going to succeed and be stable, but still at 0 hit points. Xerxes, oddly enough, comes back. It seems like something has brought him back with 3 hit points. And what he sees is, looking through the seam of the portal to the 9 hells, presumably, or maybe the in-between space, he sees this horrific form of Asmodeus he's able to see through the chest to see this heart with a humanoid in agony within the heart, like wreathing in pain and crying out. And Xerxes reaches out, and somehow his spirit form, it's like out-of-body experience, reaches out and touches this figure, who is burning, is in agony, and this figure in being touched sees Xerxes and says basically, I'm scared, like I'm hurting. And Xerxes, being the freaking amazing, caring, redemptive paladin that he is basically like, don't be scared, like I'm going to take care of you, you're okay, and pulls this figure through and basically pulls the true form of Asmodeus with this golden face and red hair, the pre-corrupted version, into their world. And he decides to continue his atonement spell, his cleansing touch on Asmodeus, casts it. It should have worked. Asmodeus is like, what's going on? What's supposed to happen? And he's like, why isn't this working? Like, don't you remember like who you were before you became the Lord of the Hells? And he's like, I think I do. And so Xerxes is kind of like, well, why isn't this working? Like, why aren't you being atoned? And Asmodeus, by the way, this is at the 55-minute timestamp. You need to go watch this again. Asmodeus says, I think I know what's going on. You tried to resurrect Evandrin and it didn't work because he wasn't really dead. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, you're trying to atone me, but I didn't do anything wrong. And his voice drops an octave and he stabs, in this moment, he stabs Xerxes. I know, bro. Stabs Xerxes through the heart, killing him, revives him. Him and Xerxes have this moment of Xerxes like screaming like, no, you're wrong. Remember who you were. Like, remember like the good side of you, basically. And Asmodeus is like, hey, idiot, this is really me. Like, I'm super evil, in case you haven't noticed. And he has this awesome kind of semi-monologue about how much he despises mortals and how back in the day, you know, there's a perception that the betrayer gods hate the prime deities, but that's not true. These are his siblings. They all came here together. Who he really hates are the mortals who, as he puts it, turned his siblings against him. And Britton has this amazing line where he basically says, you know, my only heartbreak is that once I've collected all of the souls of the mortals and my prime deity siblings, once I've collected all of their souls into my pit, I will only have eternity to torment them and punish them, basically. And then he rips the skin off of Xerxes' skull, killing him again, presumably revives him again. Xerxes wants to cast Resilient Sphere on himself, and Asmodeus 9th level counterspells it, then crushes him into the ground and breaks his spine and kills him a third time. And basically is like, yeah, you're dead. Like, I'm going to now ruin your world. And in this moment, Zartaza, the Aranyes, who had gotten the blood from Xerxes in a previous episode, is there as well. And Asmodeus grabs her by the throat, crushes her into the mace of the Black Crown, one of the arms of the betrayer, and basically says to Xerxes' spiritual form, this is here if you decide you want to still be around, if you want to stay alive, this is here for you, but just know the cost of it. Xerxes passes on to the astral plane, sort of this in between, this limbic space before going on to the afterlife, and he sees Evandrin, and Evandrin's kind of like, oh, did Laren send you here? And Xerxes is like, not exactly. And Evandrin's like, no, like, you couldn't have died. Like, and he's like, okay, well, we can fix this. We can solve this. Like, we'll figure something out. And Xerxes knows that Evandrin's been locked away here for several years, that there's really no hope for him to, most importantly, save their son, Elias, and that if Elias is to be saved from the impending doom, the only option is to pick up this mace of the Black Crown and to return to life. Him and Evandrin have this very sweet moment of Evandrin just basically saying, hey, your heart for redemption, for believing the good in others, it's not a flaw, it's something beautiful, and I worship that in you. Really great conversation. And he grabs the mace and returns to the mortal realm, these goat horns growing out of his skull and his armor becoming charred. And while this is happening, by the way, Laren is watching on the video feed from Dwemer Asmodeus talking to Vespin, and Asmodeus is like, hey, get the whole band together. And Vespin's like, oh, they're all dead, by the way. Like, these guys all killed them. And he's like, all right, whatever. Here's your job. You need to revive Raushan and Kamort, the two primordials who are sealed beneath Mount Yagora, the only two primordials who were never killed. Your job is, as the city's dock, is to release them from their bonds and to have them join us in the war against the prime deities, and more importantly, Vasselheim. So he dimension doors away. We see him stepping through to Gordranus, the newly built capital of the betrayers in Wildmount. And we hear him say to another betrayer god, brother, what do you say we go destroy Vasselheim tonight? And turns back to Vespin and says, hey, get it done. Revive the primordials. So he leaves. Xerxes comes back, basically says to Vespin, who Vespin sees him as a fellow fiend, and is basically like, get out of here, like, let me do my stuff. And he's about to leave until he decides, you know what, I haven't learned my lesson quite yet on trying to atone super evil dudes. So he does cleansing touch on Vespin. This one succeeds. Vespin's face grows back and immediately grabs the mace, basically says, this is a bad contract, let me revise it and tweak it, and basically tweaks the infernal runes that are circulating this contract around the mace to not go into effect until dawn, which is a couple of hours away. And basically is like, you have till dawn to do what you need to do. Go back to the Hall of Prophecy, to the original Carwin, the original person who was declared mad. That's who you need to talk to. And Xerxes immediately cast Revivify on Loquacious. He lay on hands on Nidus, and then he's like, I have no other spell slots. I can't bring back Patia. But Loquacious has his one item that was never destroyed, the level 3 spell slot that he gives to Xerxes, who then uses it to revive Patia. In a freaking awesome moment, the band is back together. Seret, meanwhile, sorry, I don't mean this first have to be so long, but 6-hour episode. Seret, meanwhile, does make it back to his home. Maya and Kier are both there, and he tells them, hey, like, he gives them the runes of recall and is like, hey, you're going to go away for a while. And they're freaking out. They're like, is everything okay? And he's like, yeah, everything's going to be fine. But his ring of honor that glows when someone's lying is glowing in front of them. And they're like, why is your ring glowing, Dad? And it's just a real, like, in the feels moment. And he's like, oh, it glows when danger's near, so you got to go. And Travis has this amazing moment where he says, remember, I'll always have my eye on you. And then he crushes the rune of recall in their hands, and they disappear, going to wherever Clear Eye is, his wife. Looking around the home, realizing he was never there, never present, he actually sets fire to his office and burns down his home, and knows that it's time to face what's coming. And he heads back to the Meridian Labyrinth, where everyone gets back together. They're like, all right, what do we do now? So they go to the Hall of Prophecy. They basically deactivate the runes around Carwin's bed. We find out that the oracles were never crazy. They were just declared crazy because they were giving prophecy that was freaking terrifying. And Carwin basically then gives them a new prophecy, basically saying, if the primordials, Kamort and Rashan, rejoin the betrayers, if this first step of the plan is successful, all hope is lost. Exandria will never see the dawn of hope, will never see the calamity end, basically. And they all realize, okay, what do we do about this? And Laren realizes, I have an invention, the Astral Layrite, that I was going to use to move cities to different planes. What if I use that to move our primordials out of Exandria forever? And so that becomes the new plan. They all have their different tasks of where they want to go to basically help save as many people as possible. And so they all split up. And that is the first half of this amazing episode. So, Will, my friend, take us home with the incredible second half.
Yeah. Good job, by the way. All right, so the second half, we pick up first with Patia, who has made her way to her grandfather's statue, and she's basically thinking about everything she saw from the Tree of Names vision and just the cycle of selfishness that all led to this moment. Like not only her own selfishness, the selfishness of Vespin and all those people, but also dating back to the Gaudrashari and her grandfather. And as she's thinking about this, she levitates up to the model Avalier that is held up in the statue and actually breaks off the Librarium Incantatum, the portion that represents that. She then takes that portion and her orb, which contains basically all of her knowledge, all of the notes. You know, basically it's like a condensed history, essentially, in this orb. All the relevant information that she's learned. And she teleports that to Saret's daughter. And as she's doing this, Brennan asks her, you know, like, in your mind, what like happened with your parents, or something to that effect. And she's like, you know, I don't think she really thought about it. And so Brennan then shares this memory with her, or one where she's just a small girl and her grandfather seemingly modifies both their memories and says it'll be easier this way. And having that memory kind of revealed to her, she like tries to grab her orb back before she teleports it, but it's too late.
Yeah.
And so she teleports that away. And it's then that Loris shows up walking out of the, you know, nearby Septariat door or whatever. And he's like, what's going on? And Paisha's like, you know what's going on. Like, and she just tells him to F off, basically.
It's awesome.
And he's like, all right, you know, what's going on? And Aladrin, the Wise, also comes out, or Aladamir, sorry. And he's like, is everything okay? And after a brief conversation with Paisha, kind of filling him in, he's like, we must inform the Herald. Like, Loquacious must tell the people to divert their arcane energy into the etheric net, you know, to save the cities, like sacrifice themselves so that Avalier can survive. And Paisha's like, oh, don't worry, Quay, like, he's already on it. He knows what to say. And with that, she takes her leave, but not before telling Loris that, hey, you're going to die tonight, and you're going to die to a traitor to yourself and Avalier. So then we cut to Nidus and Loquacious, and Nidus is dropping off Loquacious at the Herald's Tome in order to give this speech. But then Nidus himself heads back to the Golden Scythe, and there he tells Bodrin and Alessander, he's like, hey, come with me. We got to help the people of the city, like, get our ships, evacuate the civilians, you know, we got work to do. And they're like,
forget the gold.
Yeah. He's like, forget the gold.
Troves of gold.
Yeah.
Like thousands of gold.
They're like, forget the gold, forget like the ruling elite, like go help the people. And Bodrin says, like, as you will, Guildmaster. But as soon as Nidus turns his back, he stabs him through the back. And he's like, you've lost your way. You've lost your mind. And then in one turn, Nidus, like, bonus actions, quicken spells, holds person, and then just unleashes his attacks on him. They're all auto crits, and his dragon, Shalkorzon, also attacks him and kills him in one round. And he has this, you know, he was just stabbed in the back, so his like, how do you want to do this? Is him just like slowly plunging his sword into the front. It's like, you know, not being a coward about it. And with seeing all that, Alessander's like, yep, I'm on it. Like, will do. Yeah. He's like, and we should send one of the ships to the university to get the children as well, right? And he's like, yes, perfect. So they're off doing that. And Nidus continues on and goes to the Hall of Constructs, where he sends all but 2 of the taxmen to go help the city, like go help fight these devils that are fighting all across the city. And it's when he's here that he noticed some of the engines have been tampered with. Specifically, one of the Hodmedads that was in, I think, episode 1. One of the Hodmedads at the party was clearly messed with. So he sees how that happened. And he also sees that some of the taxmen engines have also been tampered with. And he kind of puts 2 and 2 together because there are 4 that have been tampered with. And he's like, these must be the ones in the Meridian Labyrinth. And kind of when he's putting that together, all these Hodmedads and Canalfi, or not Hodmedads, all these Canalfi like kind of emerge from within the Hall of Constructs. They've been like waiting here to kind of ambush. They're probably the ones that tampered with the engines. And so Nidus finds himself surrounded, but we hear this roar, and the Sphinx from earlier comes out and basically like decimates all these Canalfi with his roar. And he's like, I think my debt's paid, and basically saves Nidus. So then we kind of transition back to the Herald's Tome, where we have Loquacious. He finds his assistant Arya, basically immediately begins prepping to address the people. But suddenly a a portal opens up in front of him, this like majestic golden portal, and through it he can see the Feywild, and also Elminor, the High War Queen of the Burning Vale, matriarch of the Sealy Court. And she speaks to him, but she's also speaking to all of the Fey, like across Exandria, all at the same time, and he like realizes this. And she's basically saying, like, come, my children, like, you have to get off this world. Like, come back to the Feywild. I wish I could help everyone, but I can only help, you know, my children or whatever. And Loquacious is like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, but if you ask me to come, I'll come. And then he immediately casts Gift of Gab, which basically takes back the last thing you say. And he says, I'm not coming. I love you, but I love someone else more. And Elminor is like, understands, and you know, the portal closes. So then he goes back preparing for his speech, but Loris of the Weaver's Mask shows up and is like, hey, Harold, you got to give this speech, tell people they need to divert their energy to save the city. And Quay's like, yeah, that was the plan already, for sure. You want to stay and watch the speech? And Loris, you know, like sits down and he's like sending messages and stuff. But Quay then casts Wall of Force around him. And so now he's trapped and is basically like pounding on the wall, like, what are you doing? And it's then that Quay basically launches into his monologue addressing the city. And it's an amazing monologue. I'm not going to read it word for word here in the you know, sake of saving time, but he basically says the replenishment is canceled. The wizards of the city have failed you. He then transforms into Aladamir the Wise and tells the people of the city, like, run. Like, use your magic, save yourselves, just get out of here. But if you're a part of the ruling elite, if you're a part of the administration, you have to stay. Like, stay, fight, go down with the ship. And then he turns back into himself and basically gives a little heartfelt message to each member of the Ring of Brass, culminating with his message to Laren, basically saying, like, you know, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And then he launches into an ad read for the Market of Wonders. So it's a really funny little transition there. Yeah. Finally ending with "See you later." And Brennan's like, no roll required. That was a natural 20. We then cut to Kath Moira, where Xerxes and Sarah. Xerxes is going to look for his son, and Sarah is tailing him, unbeknownst to Xerxes. So they head there. He heads to Nidus' brother's house, which is where his son is. Finds his son, and his son is scared of him at first because he's got goat horns and basically looks like a demon now. But he's like, just look in my eyes, like, it's me. And he gives his son his journal and is like, all the questions you have, like, all the information you need is in there. Like, take this. And also, he rode Tempest to get here. One of Tempest's feathers kind of fell off and landed in the basket that Elias was holding. And, you know, basically says he loves him and, you know, to get out of the city, and flies away. And Sarah sees all of this. But as Xerxes is flying back, Cathmora is also under attack and by demons and stuff. And so he shouts, lay down your weapons in Infernal, because he is this champion of Asmodeus, essentially. And they actually listen. So the demons that are attacking Cathmora lay down their weapons. And that enables the druids to get more people evacuated. They're opening portals and basically saved a lot more people by doing that. Then we cut to the Astral Layrite, where Laren has arrived and realizes that what she wants to do in kind of getting rid of these primordials is possible. It's an apogee solstice, so she could banish them, but she doesn't know what would happen to the city if she did that. Paisha arrives and she's like, I saw the names of the primordials when I was touching the Tree of Life. Like, there's hundreds of names for them. I know them. Together we can make this work. So they have a half hour basically to redo Laren's entire life's work. The rest of the Ring of Brass also converge on this spot as Laren and Paisha are working away. Alarms ringing out all over the city. We are like rapidly approaching the final docking of Avalier and Kath Moira. Luis asks Brennan how long till sunrise, because this contract that Blake mentioned activates then, and he's like, it's sunrise is 5:45. It's probably like 5:33 right now. And Xerxes then tells everyone like what's happening with him and asks Nidus like, hey, you know, don't let me become something I'm not. And Nidus is like, brother, you'll always be you. I'll make sure. So now we cut to 18 seconds before docking, 3 rounds and the door to the Layrite explodes. In comes Vespin Chloros and the 4 taxmen. We roll initiative. So, again, just to kind of run through this fight kind of quickly, Nidus first tells everyone the capabilities of these taxmen, since he, helped build them. He's very familiar with them and kind of gives them clues to how to fight them. And the fight is essentially the entire Ring of Brass trying to hold back Vespin and the taxmen while Laren / Pasha continue work on creating this Layrite spell. So every turn of these 3 rounds, Laren is rolling an Arcana check to progress. And one of the first ones she does is she's told, okay, you have a choice to make. You can either ensure that the primordials are successfully banished, like 100%, or you can minimize like the damage that this is going to do to the city. And she decides, I got like Avalier be damned. I got to make sure that these, primordials are taken care of. Combat's continuing. At one point, Xerxes is going for an attack on Vespin, but he takes some opportunity attacks from taxmen on the way, and he's knocked unconscious and falls down. Nidus, having promised him that, I will make sure you don't turn, takes his turn and readies his action at the end to be like, if I fall unconscious, I'm going to fall and plunge my sword into my brother's heart, Xerxes's heart. And that does happen. And so he does plummet onto Xerxes. And we basically get to the point where there's one final round. We need to make it to Laren's last turn for her last Arcana check. And Quay is like, all right, to kind of ensure that she gets this turn, I'm going to use my action to hold a healing word on Laren. So he does that. And in the final round, Vespin casts Power Word Kill on her. And there's a whole lot that happens here. There's opportunity attacks, counterspell attempts, silvery barbs. Ultimately what happens though is the counterspells fail, but Brennan gives Travis a reaction to Vespin casting Shield on his opportunity attack, and it's a straight roll, no advantage, no disadvantage, and he rolls a natural freaking 20.
It's insane.
And he kills Vespin on the spot, so the Power Word Kill does not go off, and Laren is able to make that last Arcana check, do the last tinkering that she needs, and basically set this spell off. I forgot to mention, she does take some damage, and that healing word held by Loquacious, like she would have been unconscious, but since he held that spell, she basically never even fell unconscious. And so she's able to successfully do it with a final Arcana check of a 32, which she rolled really well. Plus, Brennan gave her extra inspiration from that Loquacious spell healing her. Is she the woman that doomed the world, or the one that saved it? And instead of releasing the primordials from their prison, they are banished across the plains of Exandria and basically obliterated. What comes next, Brennan says, the players don't really see, but it's important for them to know. Ships are ferrying people off of Avalier to safety. Tempest, called back to his feather, has made his way back to Alias and has Alias on his back and flies through a portal into the Astral Sea, where he leaps into the arms of Evandrin, reunited at last. Xerxes does not take Nidus's way out. He's given, even though Nidus did stab him, he's given, one last opportunity, and he says that he knows there's redemption and salvation for everyone, so he returns to the living, and his body begins to shift now that we've reached sunrise. His body immolates. Nidus, in these final moments, receives a sending from his brother, asking if he's okay. He says he's fine, all is well. They reminisce about their time as children. Pasha remembers her grandfather telling her, like, what's more important, Avalier or family? And he's like, we built Avalier, we can build it again. The dreamer matters more than the dream. There are many dreams to come. Sarret gets a sending stone call from his, wife and kids, and he apologizes for never being there, and he promises, like, I'm going to return to you. But the energy of this spell going off kind of cuts out the signal of the sending stone. Laren and Quay run, embrace, basically like profess their love again for each other, share a kiss, whatever time is left, they'll spend it together. And as everything is crumbling around them, Sarret is faced with the final decision. Does he accept his fate, or does he attempt to keep his promise to his family? So he looks for a way out. But the last roll of the campaign, DC 30, with an inspiration from Nidus and Quay's Pact of the Boon if he needs it, he hits a 31. So he rushes through the collapsing tunnels and just barely makes it out. And the Ring of Brass endures. And basically the Calamity sets off from there. And that's essentially where the episode ends. Ooh.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so that's what happened in episode 4.
Bit of a long one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. If you're watching just the recap, click the link below to see our whole discussion. Will, this might be the best thing I've ever seen. Like, these 4 episodes was one of the most amazing, enrapturing, beautiful stories that I have ever, like, I am so grateful for the opportunity that I had to watch these 4 episodes. And I'm unashamed about, like, for people who are like, you know, it wasn't that good. I'm like, it was that good. Like, if I could erase, I used to say this about Lost. If I could erase my memory and experience it again, I would do that for sure for this 4-part series. And I've, like, blatantly, like, annoyingly shared it with a lot of my other friends, being like, you have to watch these 4 episodes. But hey, so what do you think about it?
Yeah, man. I mean, I agree. I thought it was incredible. I mean, basically every step of the way we've been talking about how good this is. Definitely one of my favorite stories of all time, for sure. Already in that list. You know, comparison is the what do they say? Like the thief of joy or something. So not to compare it to like, you know, campaign 1, 2, or 3. It's just, I don't think you can, because it's just, I don't know. It's a 4-episode miniseries versus, you know, 120 plus.
And I've seen, like, some of these discussions happening, and, like, I think you're right. Like, comparisons to the Thief of Joy. I don't know how worthy those conversations are to be had. And, like, I've even seen, like, some people, like, writing essays, like, comparing, like, a 4-episode arc to an entire campaign, and, like, well, here's why you could compare and here's why you can't. And I loop those people in with the same people who are, like, rules lawing the final encounter. I'm like, guys, you're probably missing it, honestly. Yeah. You know, you're kind of missing it. You know, I don't think these things are really mutually exclusive in terms of, like, well, how does it compare to campaign 1? I'm like, my mind doesn't even go there. I'm just like, this was a 4-part story told over 20 hours. And it was, for me personally, it was truly meaningful. I mean, I literally, like, watching those last 30 minutes, like, when it was over, I just leaned back and was like, dude, this was amazing.
Yeah. So it was phenomenal. And again, not to compare, but just to show how like impressive it was. That I know that feeling you're talking about, kind of when it was over and just, like, sitting in that moment. That was the same feeling I've had at the end of campaign 1 and 2. So, like, they were able to emulate that depth in 4 episodes that, you know, was built in 120. So it's just impressive work by everyone around. And
we had a truly amazing cast. Brennan Lee Mulligan is, to borrow his words, incredible. You know, he was so good at creating the emotional depth of the story. And when players had an action or a detail, he was so good at responding to it and then adding, like, a layer of meaningfulness to it. I am forever going to be a fan of Brennan. I mean, I was so amazed by what he accomplished in 4 episodes. And shout out to him and Matt collaborating. We heard in the Twitter Spaces wrap up yesterday, he gave a little bit behind the table of, like, you know, what were, like, his boundaries. And he talked about how sitting down with Matt and kind of, like, exploring the lore together, and Brennan being like, hey, this is thousands of years ago, so should they be, like, in togas? Like, you know, and Brennan and Matt being like, no, like, here's kind of, like, what it was like. And shout out to Matt with trusting Brennan with his baby, basically. I think Brennan just, from episode 1, we saw the world building in play, and I'm trying to find, like, new ways to say how much I loved it, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that Brennan guy might know what he's doing.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of his other stuff. Like from episode 1, I was like, all right, who's this guy? Is this going to be good?
Yeah.
And from episode 1, I was like, this guy's incredibly gifted. And now finishing episode 4, I'm like, I need to go find his other content. So
yeah, I've been talking to some people in the comments of our videos that like didn't watch Critical Role, but checked this out because of Brennan, and they watched Dimension 20, which is, I don't know if that's the name of like an all encapsulating name for what they do, or if that's just like one subsection of it. But they came over from that side of things, and so I was talking to them a bit about like where to start. And I mean, not that we need to get lost in the weeds of this right now, but you and I think we should like maybe even do a series on it, because they're much shorter. I think they're only a few episodes like this was.
Yeah, I'm definitely like chasing a high, like chasing a drug now of I need more, it's a bit ironic, short form, short form content, if you will. But yeah, like 3, 4, 5 episodes maybe. Man, where do we start with this episode?
I don't know, man. There's like a lot of things I want to talk about, and I like kind of just a meta conversation about the series as a whole as well.
Sure.
Let me scroll down to the bottom of my notes here. I mean, first, while we're talking about Brennan, just to goose on him a little bit more, some of the freaking one-liners, bro, and quotes he had, not only in this episode, but just throughout the series, were so good. Not the least of which is how he ended it out, being like, why do we tell stories? That little monologue. But you mentioned this in the recap, being like, my greatest heartbreak is that when I've collected all my siblings and the mortals, I'll only have eternity to punish them. And one other one I noted was when Sarah is at his house, after sending his kids away and kind of just like reminiscing. I think Brennan ends it with like, you've solved the mystery of who your children were. Like that's like the last great mystery you've solved. And I was like, ooh, so good.
He was really gifted at just those moments happening and saying like the perfect line for sure. And I know there's a lot, I'm trying to like make some comments without like pulling in like a bit of the obnoxious crowd of like, don't try to emulate Matt Mercer or Brennan, but I'm like, let's also recognize some things that are really special. And that's creating these weighty moments. And Travis even mentioned, and we'll probably reference it a couple times, but yesterday they had a preliminary post series wrap up via Twitter Spaces, which I don't know if I was the only one who knew who found out for the first time what Twitter Spaces even was. It's like an audio call, I guess.
Yeah.
But Travis even mentioned that he typically doesn't like really feel the emotional weight of things that are happening, but he found himself really hit by these moments with his kids and that specific scene even, which, by the way, if you watch like the last 30 minutes, everyone's crying. Like everyone's crying. Everyone's in the feels. I mean, I'm crying. I mean, this was just like so great. The other line that I really loved was Badran when he stabs Nidus in the back. When Nidus is like, forget all the treasure, forget all the gold. Let's save as many people as we can.
Yeah.
And Badran says, you've lost your mind. Since the beginning of time, the gods made all the gold there will ever be. There will always be more people. And like,
ooh,
everyone, it's like the old RPGs, like so-and-so will remember that. It was like everyone felt that. So yeah, there were some amazing lines from Brennan, for sure. And I'm super jelly that I've never been creative enough to like, as a DM, come up with those great moments.
Well, I know he's had a lot of practice, so don't beat yourself up. I think he's been doing it. So I've never seen any Dimension 20 or anything, but there was some video that like he and Matt collaborated on that was like GM tips for homebrewing that I watched forever ago. And I remember, again, I shouldn't even brought this up because I don't remember it well enough, but he was talking about how he's been like DMing since he was like 9 or something. So yeah. I mean, the man isn't freaking expert. He's clearly put the time in. So, don't beat yourself up. You'll get there.
Yeah. Since we're kind of on the theme of like great moments or like great lines, the fact that Loquacious's only item that wasn't destroyed was the Nat 20 on the spell slot. Like, I wonder what would have been their options, Like, it was just so perfectly it was so that, and also the nat 20 on Vespin. Like there were just these moments that were so insane.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just incredible. And then also Loquacious, when he lies to Loris and then says, "Do you want to watch the broadcast?" I was like, "What are you doing, Sam?" Yeah, great moments for sure.
100%. And again, not to just goose on this for an hour, but I can't believe I left this one out. But Brennan's whole original Asmodeus speech when he was like, "Because I did nothing wrong," or whatever. Woo, bro.
Yeah, so my wife's been quoting that. Like, I'll be in the kitchen, like getting a drink, and she'll be like, "But I didn't do anything wrong." I'm like, "Okay, honey, you got it."
So kind of, and again, we're probably just gonna like jump all over the place here, but like if I'm steering somewhere and you weren't ready, just stop me.
Sure. Yeah.
But speaking of that moment, kind of to dive into it a little bit, we have him emerging from the tree, but like you mentioned in the recap, he's first like this grotesque like demon, let's say, with the true Asmodeus in the heart. And as we know, Xerxes kind of had to pull him out, which he is the blood of the chosen one. Like clearly Xerxes was integral in, regardless of this, the tree being destroyed, regardless of what Vespin had working in the background, clearly Xerxes, I think, had to, as the final peg in this plan, pull him out. Otherwise, what's with that ruse of like him being, why the ruse of like the demon with the true form in the heart? Like, what did you take from that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that like Brennan purposely left a bit ambiguous, but I think above the board there, it was maybe kind of like a backup plan if the tree like wasn't destroyed, so to speak, or if someone else hadn't like ushered in the calamity, so to speak. Like we still have like this sort of blood plan. I think in terms like a more neat and tidy, like in the board kind of, or in play kind of conversation, where my mind goes is that like it was like the final barrier on this world was they had to be like invited or drawn in, and the barrier was destroyed, the tree of names was destroyed, but Xerxes, through the pact of blood drawing him in, was the final gap to leap over to finally enter our world. And I also liked how Brennan, just as a random aside, I kept waiting for him to describe Asmodeus, and he never really did. He just really, as much as he said, was like, you cannot comprehend like the evilness of what you're seeing in front of you. So I also just randomly also enjoyed that. But we did get a couple of details, 12 feet tall and red skinned. But yeah, I assume that was happening. Is that your take on it too? Yeah,
that was my take, that it was kind of the last thing that needed to happen for him to like fully walk this plane again. Which I do think that these are just really cool. Like there may be that basis behind them, but also like you mentioned, it's kind of like flavor and enhancing the moment. So I think this next question I say is kind of beside the point, but I'm still going to say it anyway. I wonder if that implies that maybe there were other chosen ones that ushered in the other betrayer gods that made their way over as well. And this was like a multi-pronged plan, or if Asmodeus was just really the only one pulling strings, and because he got through, now everyone can.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know if it was like within the same, like the context was the same. I mean, Xerxes, we had wondered in episode 3, like we thought the sort of twist on Asmodeus' story as like just trying to do the right thing and being kind of thrown under the bus was, I thought it was kind of clever, and I thought maybe there's some truth to this. And our original gut feeling of him being played ended up being true. He was getting played. I don't know if that context would be true for other champions, but we do at least know in Xerxes' case, dude got played pretty bad. Which, I mean, you watch the rest of the table reacting as he's drawing Asmodeus in. Abria almost kind of crossed a line of like table etiquette of her being like, like, what are you doing? Rather than kind of letting it happen. But yeah, dude got played pretty bad. And So, but that's the fault of his character, right? And you mentioned it in the Twitter Spaces conversation that he's an Oath of Redemption paladin who, at his core, believes in the salvation and redemption of everyone. But even at the end, when he has the option of, he has the option. Sorry, my wife just walked in. I'm trying not to like spoil anything. 1 second. You take it from here, just 2 seconds.
So I will say that I thought, for those of you that didn't watch the Twitter space, one of the things Luis brought up was that he told Brennan, he wants to have this Arc of Redemption paladin, right? And he says, I would like to have an encounter with a betrayer. But that's all he told Brennan. And Brennan basically crafted this whole, arc, if you will, of him and Asmodeus. Whereas Luis just thought that, I'm talking about what Luis said during the Twitter space, how he just thought, he wanted to have an encounter with the betrayer, but he assumed it would be like on the battlefield,
right,
like facing it. And really Brennan hit him with this whole like really personal arc with Asmodeus. And I thought that was so cool that, like, because we had talked about how much like the players knew, how much input they had on kind of maybe what, not that they knew what was going to happen, but like, maybe helped kind of tool certain storylines maybe. So it's just cool to know that that was all Brennan. The only direction was that I would like to see I'd like to meet a betrayer. And I don't know, just again, not to just goose on Brennan, but just so well done. And kind of quick segue there, during the Twitter space as well, he kind of talked about like all the players never felt like they were being railroaded for this 4-episode story that we knew where it was going, yet they still felt like they had complete freedom. And Brennan was like, if you know your players, you know the rails. Like, so just like talk to your players, know their characters, and you kind of know what they're going to do without having to ask them. So you can still, I don't like using the word railroaded, but you could still railroad them without them feeling railroaded.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of the difference too with like the long form campaign is like, and I think Matt's even maybe mentioned this, like the world is sort of yours to explore as you will, and you have the space and time, 100 episodes plus to explore that. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have that in 4 episodes. I don't necessarily want to compare this to the original EXU yet. But yeah, in this 4-arc story, it could have very easily been, all right, you go here, you do this, you do that. And you can tell that these certain places that Brennan built, i.e. like the Hall of Prophecy, the players sort of intrinsically went to those places. And actually, if you watch back, Brennan's very good at being subtle about it. There's an episode, I think it's early in episode 3, before they go to the Hall of Prophecy, or maybe it was episode 2, episode 2, I guess, they go to the Hall of Prophecy. Earlier in that episode, Brennan, they're just sort of talking about everything that's happened, and Brennan basically says, now remember, you guys still don't know what happened at the Hall of Prophecy, but he says it way more subtle than that. And people are like, oh yeah, let's go check out the Hall of Prophecy. And it didn't, like you said, it didn't feel like a railroad, even though this was obviously a very, but Brennan said in the Twitter spaces, he never expected Nidus to go. And so that was a really cool detail where they kind of got to ad hoc, create this moment. And that was pretty refreshing to me too, because when a series like this ends, like you don't necessarily want to see how the dough gets made or the meat gets made, or whatever the expression is, but like you kind of wonder like how much was talked about. And the Twitter Spaces conversation yesterday just kind of helped reinforce that, like, this was sort of like this happening as it was happening kind of thing. It does seem like the players were given like a very generic high level, like I kind of envision like a murder mystery party, like where everyone's given like the description of their character, and like the reason you would have to have done it. Because we heard the players mention several times over the series, like, I thought it was going to be you, I thought it was going to be me. So it sounds like they were all given like a, one of you is going to be the one to sort of pull the trigger, but you all have like a reason why you would.
Yeah. And how cool that like that, Nidus going to the Hall of Prophecy, which, Brennan didn't expect, ended up being like a major shift for his character. Like him seeing that prophecy, kind of made him turn sides in terms of that final conflict when some were touching the tree. Laren wanted to destroy it. So just really cool that all that kind of just blossomed organically. And I know we keep saying stuff about Brennan, but there is one more thing I wanted to mention on him. The freaking just balance and like tempo. I don't know if that's the right word, but almost 7-hour episode that started with like this combat encounter that basically killed half the players, destroyed 90% of their magic items, and that was all in like the first 10% of the episode, and then we still have a very important combat at the end of the episode, and just like the DM balance, and obviously if you've DM'd, you can kind of like push things one direction or the other so you don't accidentally kill your whole players or anything, but just still phenomenal to like have the episode start where it did and still have such high stakes, like high tension combat with such like depleted resources at the end. So just
and
bravo.
I wondered where this would end up, and I love that it ended with Vesp and Chloris. Like this was the original like face of evil to the story that we knew from the Tal'Dorei Reborn sourcebook, and then also mentioned in Critical Role Campaign 3. He's mentioned in the first episode. He shows his face. So I loved how in a world of fighting evil gods, it came down to this corrupted man that they end up fighting. Which, if you're okay going there, I have some questions in terms of like sort of. And sorry, my wife brought in some food, so I'm going to keep accidentally hitting my plate in front of me. So here's what presumably happens, and I want to get your take on this. So we know from past content, from past episodes, so everyone's been wanting to emulate the ritual of seeding, this ascension that the Matron of Ravens did. We know that Vespin from the first episode tried something similar, but rather than unseat a prime deity, wanted to unseat a betrayer god. Presumably got his head handed to him, was made a pawn of Asmodeus, and became his puppet. And then from that 2-week point, Asmodeus was basically using him to basically create the end of the world. My question for you is, Brennan calls him, this is a detail that popped up on Reddit, Brennan calls him a Malconvoker, which is a subclass from a previous edition. I think it was 3rd edition, maybe 2nd edition of D&D, which the specific description, I'm just reading off the top of my head, a Malconvoker is someone who understands infernalology, demons and fiends, and basically can manipulate them towards the path of good. So it's created this questioning of two sides of the story. Basically, was Vespin hungry for power and tried to take over the betrayer god's position in sort of like a self-serving, arrogant way? Or was, if you think back to his interview where he says, wouldn't it be better for the world if we were to destroy a betrayer as opposed to a prime deity? Do you think his intentions were possibly even noble and good, and he was, his naivety basically cost the world its future? What do you think?
I think both. I think that he maybe had some good intentions in terms of, wanting to usurp a betrayer, get that guy out of the picture, but still to like want to become a god. I think there's a lot of obviously like selfishness there and arrogance and, hubris, which is like the theme of the whole miniseries. But I think both are true. I don't think it's a black and white thing. Like he was pure evil and just wanted to become a god to take over the world. I think humans are messy, gray,
Sure.
So for my money, I think he was imperfect, but probably had some it wasn't just a pure evil ascension. I think there was some like for the good of, I'm helping out other people too. Like I'm going to become a god, but I'm also doing the world a favor. So
yeah. Well, I like how you called it gray too, because maybe he was even like, being in a true form of being like unaware, not self-aware, was legitimizing it in his head. Because we know also in the Twitter Spaces conversation regarding the astral lay rite, we know that the Drashari tithe, I think he said 25, I think Brennan said 25% was supposed to go to the Tree of Names, and then all the rest was supposed to go to the replenishment. But over the most recent years, that had been dwindled down to only 5%, and the rest was being basically siphoned off for people's own indulgences, and specifically mentioned as Nidus and Laren to sort of fund this project with the Astral Layrite. They were even taking that energy, that etheric energy, and bartering with other people to sort of either fund the project or, you know, keep the project under wraps. So in a similar way, they were doing things that I'm sure in their mind, you know, for the greater good, made sense, even though, you know, the morality of it could probably be questioned.
Yeah, 100%. It feels like that's kind of the main running theme through everything. Like every character kind of had that same
flaw.
Yeah. And on the Vespin thing, I also just thought it was so cool how, you know, I don't think he was redeemed, but he had that kind of moment of lucidity when, you know, Xerxes cleansed him or whatever. And, you know, we could see that he was full of regret and, you know, like the world is going to remember me for this. Like, I hope I'm forgotten. He's like, I hope you're like, for your sake, I hope you're forgotten. Like, cause I'm not going to be type of thing.
Which I love Xerxes, you know, that hasn't been written yet. And we're kind of like, no, man, he's pretty, it's nice to say, but yeah. And I wonder though, if that was even like, you know, we know the father of lies, you know, basically, I presume Asmodeus maybe showed him that his name would be destroyed, and he made a deal, just like Xerxes did, you know, made a deal to not be forgotten, and we saw what happened.
Yeah, and I think that moment of lucidity kind of shows that he wasn't just pure evil, you know. Which is such a cool moment too. It made me wonder, like, that's one of those things that, like, if that moment hadn't have happened, I'm sure Brennan would have had another way to be like, Luis, you have until sunrise, you know, but maybe not. I mean, probably though, but it just such a cool way to like kind of buy him that time of, you know, rewriting the end of the contract before it's finished. But, you know, just the curious part of me is like, what would have happened if, you know, he had never tried to cleanse Vespin and that moment never happened?
Well, I mean, when he did it though, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was just like, bro, like, Xerxes, dude, you gotta stop, man. Like,
that's who he is, man. That's who he is.
And I think I don't fault Luis for it either. I think he played that fault well. But I mean, like, even at the end when Nidus stabs into the heart and Brennan's like, do you move on to the afterlife or do you? And he's like, you know, I still believe anyone can be redeemed. I was like, bro.
I was glad because I'm hoping we might see him again in some form or fashion.
Sure. I mean, yeah, but I'm like, bro.
Yeah.
Like, because here's the way. I don't think it's just like belief in redemption for himself. I think it's belief in redemption of Asmodeus. Like, truly believes in redemption, and so like I'm gonna, you know, I'm not just believing my own redemption, I'm believing that Asmodeus can even be redeemed. And I'm like, bro, like, this guy is tragically flawed in terms of his naivety. I'm like, and again, I'm not knocking the character. I don't think it's a poorly written thing. I'm just like reacting as a viewer. I'm just like, bro, like, just go to heaven, bro. Like, just be amongst the reeds and just like enjoy life. Sit on a beach.
Who knows that's where he was headed?
True. Yeah.
I wasn't, even if he had chosen to be like, no, I want to pass on, I don't think he would have. You really think Asmodeus is going to like have that simple of an out clause for like his chosen champion?
Yeah, true. He did. It was a bargain for his soul. So maybe it's sweeter this way. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's the illusion of choice. He didn't really have a choice, but the fact that he got to choose, maybe that does make it a bit sweeter for sure. So,
and while we're on Xerxes, I have some thoughts here. And I tweeted at Luis and he responded. I don't know if you saw, but I wanted to talk to you about it here and not away from the podcast. But a lot of, let me see if I can find the exact quote, but a lot of things Luis was saying made me wonder some stuff, and some other people were thinking the same thing. So in that first like speech where at the beginning of the episode where, you know, Asmodeus is like, I did nothing wrong. And they kind of have this back and forth, and, you know, Xerxes is yelling at him. He's like, You're not this. Have you forgotten? You think you know how you came here. You think you stumbled across this place. Look at me. I am godless. I am a conduit of divinity that is far greater and more ancient than anything you've ever understood. You didn't stumble upon this place. You were called here. We have always been here. You were wandering in the abyss, lost, and we called you here so that you could have a home. You didn't create anything. We've always been here. You came and shaped, and you changed, but you didn't create. You are no god. You are a child. And column A, just amazing, like character moment, character work. Yeah. But column B, some of that stuff, like, is Luis just making that up on the spot, or is that coming from somewhere? And I think we briefly talked about this maybe in some of our Campaign 3 podcasts or something. But there's, we talked about the beacons that made an appearance.
Luxon.
Yeah, the Luxon is.
Don't worry, I caught up on my lore from. I was like, let's just rip the spoiler band-aid off here because I gotta know some more. But
yeah, okay,
yeah. So the Luxon beacons, right?
So this is slight spoilers for anyone that's like, I don't want to know anything about anything. Like maybe mute for a minute. But it's not like storyline relevant spoilers. Yeah. It's like lore.
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't even call it a Campaign 2 spoiler because in deep diving, I didn't feel like anything was spoiled for me.
Yeah, it's just lore of the world at whole. So the Luxon, and I mean, this isn't like we know this to be a fact. This is just what some cultures believe. The Luxon is like this entity that found Exandria, and it was just a rock. And the Luxon, in order to understand itself, because it doesn't know what it is, kind of embraced Exandria and gave it life, and that's when the primordials sprung up. And then, as we've found out in this series, at some point these deities arrive on Exandria and start doing stuff. Right. But we know, or at least I mean, who knows? The truth could be anything, but the deities are what created the mortals. So the fact that Xerxes is out here saying, like, you didn't create me, like, we were, like, I was already here, made me wonder, like, we know he doesn't believe in any gods, or doesn't get his power from gods, but maybe does he get his power from the Luxon? Is he a paladin of the Luxon? And that's why he's talking in this way, being like, I am representing something far older than even you. Yeah. And like those things all like line up too nicely for it to just have been something randomly that Luis decided to say in that moment. And so I tweeted at him and I was like, hey, since Calamity's over, like, do you mind answering this question? I was like, some of the things you were saying made me think that you might be a paladin of the Luxon. And let me just look up exactly what he said.
Yes.
He said
thumbs up emoji.
He said, an excellent question that I don't have the answer to. Haha, but I love the theory. So it's not a no, it's not a yes. And it also, like, it's not like Luis has watched every episode of Critical Role, So I don't know what to take here. It seems like way too much of a coincidence for it to be something he just improv'd. But so like maybe Brennan and or Matt like kind of had a discussion with him and didn't like fully flesh out like, all right, this is what the Luxon is. This is what, like didn't necessarily like explain all that to him in depth, but maybe he knows something. And
I do think I do think it's a little bit of both. Like he's having this awesome moment and there's a little bit of like, maybe I would even call it like a Bob Ross happy accident there of like, okay, that could actually be something. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he was like sat down and said like, this is what you are. I think in the moment he's speaking out of like, because he said he doesn't believe in the gods, which I mean, they exist. But presumably like doesn't necessarily believe in like bowing down completely to the gods. So there's like a personal authority there. I think that's partly what he's speaking to. Like we were here, like you shaped, you didn't create. But I think you're pointing out, it almost felt like something was speaking through him. Mm-hmm. Possibly what came before, the Luxon. I think you've picked on something really cool, and I think there's if I'm Matt Mercer, I'm thinking about that moment and being like, ooh, and getting my pen to paper, like, oh, that could be really good, and already letting the thoughts go. So.
There And there was also, I don't remember the exact phrasing. I wish I'd wrote it down. But there are also a few different times. I don't know if it was like in the conversations with the Vandrin or maybe at another point. But like Brennan specifically said, like, your heart alone is like connected to a power like far beyond the stars or something. I'm paraphrasing, but there was something said to that effect. And so that combined with this too, it's like, what are they talking? Is it just like a flowery moment of saying like, you know, cause he's the linchpin and everything that's happening here, or is it something deeper? And there is some connection to the Luxon here.
Well, there's like also like, you know, like Big Bang-esque, dialogue around like stardust, you know, becoming life and all these different things. The allusions to the cosmic, like stars, like beyond the stars and the power of stars, and even from his first dream, all of this seems to call back to at the moment of creation type imagery, which I think only gives more credibility to what you're talking about. Which again feels too intentional to be accidental.
Yeah, so I feel like it might not be as simple as like that's a direct line from Xerxes to the Luxon, but I feel like there's enough debris around that there might be something going on. I just don't know exactly what that would be. And I mean, and the fact that he just didn't straight out say no, I think is interesting too. But I don't think he was like, I don't know. We've said it. I don't need to expand on it again, but yeah. Also, just shout out Luis, man. Like, how cool of him to respond. Like, and he's liked a few of our tweets talking about the show. So, just what a guy.
One of us.
Yeah, we'll invite him on the podcast next week.
I think that's what's really special about watching something like Calamity is you see people at the table who maybe you haven't typically, like if you're a CR watcher, you haven't necessarily seen some of these people before, and he was amazing. He was really amazing. He really played his character well. And for me, it's just always a nice, again, happy accident. You know, I watch something and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. And I'm like, okay, I love that person. Like, I want to see more stuff from that person. Felt the same way with Robbie, for example, where it was like, I need to see everything Robbie related now. But that's definitely one of the cool, and honestly, I don't know about you, but it gives, I think there was prior to the start of campaign 3, there was sort of this, just speaking out for myself, this ponderance around where does the CR brand go without Matt Mercer and without this specific table? You know, it's kind of a very much like Sam Walton dies, like where does Walmart go now? Or like, you know, Steve Jobs dies, where does Apple go now? Like, is there a future there? And I think Calamity did really well for the brand of Critical Role. We had a table that Matt Mercer was nowhere to be found. We had new cast people, a new DM, and it was one of the best pieces of content that the Critical Role brand has put out. If I'm a longtime fan of Critical Role, I'm beyond just the success of Calamity. I should be feeling incredibly excited knowing that this brand can continue and flourish even without the original cast.
Yeah. And I hope it's a long way away before Matt ever hangs it up. And I mean, even if he hangs it up, he's still going to be involved, you know,
right?
Because they've built a juggernaut here that they're not just going to walk away from entirely. But when Matt takes a step back, I hope that's not for a long time still, but friggin' write Brennan Lee Mulligan a blank check to join this team. Like, if he's the one that takes over when Matt does step down eventually, or if they start running 2 shows, you know, or maybe just miniseries, like, get that man on the team. Like, he needs to be. And I know they're doing Dimension 20 stuff, so not to take away from that, but come on now.
It is funny though. I talked to someone the other day where I was like, hey, have you seen Calamity? Because I knew they did D&D, and he was like, oh, that's the Critical Role thing, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I honestly have never watched anything Critical Role. I've only ever watched Dimension 20. So bringing it back around to our original conversation, it is cool how there's like an entire tribe for that. And I'm, like we said at the start, I'm excited to indulge in that as well.
Yeah, me too.
So
what was I going to say? Just quick shout. I mean, not that we were really on this subject, but also Lou, man, we were talking about how
great.
Luis and also Brennan being new people. Abria as well, but we've had, you know, for the first EXU, I don't consider her new really.
Right.
Blew me away. Like, I think this is so tough. Like picking between your I don't have kids, but like picking a favorite between your kids. I want to say that like Nidus and Xerxes were like my two favorite characters. They were all so great, but like it's crazy that these two new people were able to catapult themselves immediately into that discussion.
I think it's. I mean, Lou's done. I don't know how much D&D content Luis has done. I know Lou has done a lot with Brennan, with Dimension 20. I got the impression Luis might have been the most
amateur, like least experienced.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the right. I don't want to use that wording because I think it's disrespectful. I think to how well they did. Like the least exposed, I think, that we've seen them, and they were just amazing. Yeah, they played their parts really, really well for sure.
Yeah,
it just makes me excited for more guests like on these shows. Mm-hmm. Like, is it Erica Ashe?
Ishii, I think, but yeah.
Ishii, okay. Yeah. And I apologize, I had never seen content from her, but I was calling back to the latest guest on Critical Role Campaign 3. Yeah, she's amazing. There's just, it's great having these cast people come on and just getting to experience different personalities and people's different styles, and you know.
Yeah, and watching them, cool. If they are new, kind of fall in love with it, you know, and like just naturally take to it, like Robbie
and showing other people like my wife, like, hey, check out this show, and then they're enraptured in it, and they're like, where's this been my whole life? And you're like, right. So it's a great time for D&D in general, for sure.
It's good stuff.
So if I can transition the conversation, I don't know how long we need to be with this, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on. So we have Calamity, who just ended, and I'm just going to go and say to almost universal acclaim, like the comments I've seen calling it just some of the best content they've ever seen. It's not hard to find these comments. Comparing this to the first EXU, I won't loop Kaimal into this because I haven't seen it yet. The 2-part story, I haven't seen it yet, and also I've also seen pretty positive things about Kaimal, but I haven't seen it, so I don't want to comment. But just the maiden voyage into EXU territory, the first 9 episode arc that we got to experience, to I don't know if it's unfair to say mediocre responses or lukewarm responses. Some people really loved it, some people didn't like it. There was a lot of conversation about that. In your minds, what did Calamity do well that wasn't present in the original EXU? Like, why wasn't the acclaim quite there for the original EXU?
They're so different. Like, Calamity had built in the highest stakes possible from the beginning. These are high-level characters that already had rich, storied histories, powerful connections. Like, they were important people within the world. So there's a lot of cool things to explore just at their stations in life. The highest possible stakes. Like, we're witnessing an event that is like possibly the most important event in the history of the world. I think that just they're two different stories, like kind of like I think I mentioned way back at the beginning of this episode. The feeling of these 4 episodes kind of reminded me of the same weight that an end of a campaign had, like, and that just wasn't present in EXU because that wasn't present in the first EXU because that's just not the story that was being told, you know. Again, comparison's the thief of joy, right? But I just really don't think you can compare them. It, like, the first EXU was just more of like a normal campaign. Like, yeah, there was kind of some place we needed to end up at the end of the 8 episodes, but nowhere near in the same way that there was with Calamity. And these are low-level characters. We're just meeting them for the first time. They're not important. They're not powerful. And they're just kind of finding their way in the world. And as we know, that was the introduction for some of our Campaign 3 people. So it kind of served as a prologue for Campaign 3. And I think you're comparing like the first chapter of a book to like the last chapter of a 7 series of books.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. and also, I mean, just it feels like everyone is firing off on the highest of levels for Calamity. Not that anyone like phoned it in for EXU, but I don't know. I just like they're like two different beasts to me, and I think Calamity has a lot that like is working for it to make it, more impactful. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, the context, the premise is definitely more favorable, I think, for the Calamity because it's something that's been referenced so many times, and like you said, from the first episode of the first EXU, you know, they're waking up from like partying, and you're kind of like, okay, so like, what's kind of, where are they? What's going on? Who are these people? And I think also you mentioned like the cast of Calamity really firing off. I think it is fair to call the first EXU kind of a maiden voyage into like new content because it did feel like they were kind of exploring things and trying things for better or worse, including the great Amy and Robbie, who were awesome cast people, but they were sort of having to learn the mechanics of D&D in those first few sessions, you know, asking like, okay, so what's advantage, or how do I do this? Or even there was even like some weird tension too of like Abria having to explain like, you know, this is what you should be doing right now in terms of like what to roll and how to use your character sheet, stuff like that. All of these things can be really an interrupting of pacing for the story, which in Calamity, I mean, it went from like one thing to the next. But I do think that with the first EXU, there was sort of this sense of like, let's kind of find the story. And we talked about this in our post episode discussions of like, okay, now what's the thread we pull on? Whereas Calamity, it was a lot more tangible. And I think even like, I do wonder like, what would EXU have been if instead of 9 episodes, it had been 4 episodes? So that feels like a big difference there too of, you know, it was less targeted in terms of where the story was going, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Calamity was far more polished, and I don't mean that as a slight to the first EXU, but like Matt and Brennan sat down, figured out, like they knew the story that was being told, and then they crafted that story. EXU, the first one, was just, let's see what happens. You know what I'm saying? So you can put a lot more like, I don't know. There's just two different beasts. And it's what you said about like kind of Robbie and Amy, like still learning some of the D&D things. Them and also everyone else at the table was also learning their characters. Like, and I don't mean mechanically, I mean like role play wise. Like that's because, I mean, that's what you do when you make a brand new character in a brand new campaign. Right. You have ideas for what they want to be, but they get fleshed out as you play, right? For Calamity, they were experts on their character. Their characters they were already fully fleshed out 3-dimensional beings that they got to play with because they probably meticulously worked that out, you know? So I think that all those things kind of coming together is probably what made people a lot higher on Calamity than compared to the first one. Yeah.
And I do think it's great. First EXU is great for like seeing different DM styles. I think Abria is a lot more like Rule of Cool. You know, and I think actually the comment I saw like on Reddit was like, Matt wants to create a really amazing like story for you to engage in, and then Brendan wants to give you PTSD. You know, so like everyone has a different style, and I think it has been cool seeing different DMs just to see those types of games be played. So
Matt can definitely give PTSD too. Just throw that out there. Yeah.
Well, having said that, what else do you want to talk about? What else do you want to?
I have a few just like kind of one-off things that I wanted to just parse out here. I mentioned this briefly in the recap, but Paisha and her parents and her grandfather seemingly modifying her memory about something. We are getting a campaign wrap-up, so we might actually get this answer if somebody asks this, which maybe we should ask this. I don't know if you saw, but they opened up questions that I think it closes either tomorrow or the next day, but we can ask questions for the wrap up.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe somebody will ask that there. But I was just wondering, like, what is that? Like, did they die because of something the grandfather did? Like it seemed like there was something kind of juicy there and to my understanding, he also made himself forget, but that might've just been me reading the context wrong. But it seemed like he modified both her and his own memory, saying like, it's easier if we forget.
I'm assuming they had done something that was worthy to be ashamed of. And where my mind immediately goes is the ritual of seeding. Like maybe they tried the matron's ritual and it failed miserably. Like we know from like some of the slight comments that people who try it all the time that it never ends well. And there's kind of like a joking, condescending, like, oh yeah, another one of those. So I kind of wonder if something like that maybe have happened. Also knowing the status of the Porcos, and that maybe modify memory was just, as Amir put it, it's just easier this way. So I don't know.
Yeah, that could definitely be it. And he also go ahead.
I was gonna say I also wondered if Paisha's mom could have been the matron of Ravens, since that has a bit of a neat and tidy fall in. Amir's comment, from in my mind, kind of combats that in the sense of like Amir kind of having something to do with them forgetting. If it was matron of Ravens, I would have seen it more of like, you know, like, oh yeah, I don't really remember, or something. I don't know.
Well, we do know that the matron of Ravens was Paisha's mentor, and then
was a mentor. Yeah.
And then in that moment when that happened, Marisha said, "Thanks, Mom," and like she immediately clarified, like, I was joking. But
yeah, because Travis was like, "Wait, what?" Yeah.
But maybe there's more there. But what Amir did say in that moment, when the memory thing was happening, he says, "Where they failed, you'll succeed." So, I mean, that might just be like a generalized, like, they kind of let me down, you won't. But maybe it was like maybe it was the ritual of seeding, and they failed, and he, you know, wants somebody in their family to succeed, or who knows. But just some juiciness there. That
I just love the arrogance of this story. Like everyone makes fun of the people who failed, and yet everyone is trying to do the same thing. Like everyone is doing this thing. I mean, Laren, that's what the Astral Layrite is. Laren is trying to, in her own way, do the ritual of seeding and become a god, like try to go to the divine plane or what have you. So I just love the arrogance. The theme of hubris is so palpable. It's so well done, but just the arrogance of like, yeah, check out all these idiots who failed. All right, so when are we trying to do this again? Yeah, it's just great. The hypocrisy is so great.
It really is. And another thing in the Twitter space I thought was funny is that Abria was worried that Sarah was going to try to kill her, and so I think she said she was like taking glances at his character sheet or something to try to prepare for that.
Yeah.
But also, Abria, Marisha, and Lou apparently all got together separately, kind of similarly to how their three characters were the ones, you know, doing the Slayrite thing. So I just thought that was cool, kind of inside baseball as well, that they actually took the time to do that and kind of plan above board.
Oh yeah.
All right, so moving on from that, the other thing I wanted to talk about was Loquacious. So we know that he is Bard Warlock. Those are his classes. And then there were a couple clues there at the end that make me think his patron was the Raven Queen. In that first moment where they're all like dying in the explosion, you know, he says his face is changing thousands of times, and like the last one it lands on is the Raven Queen's mask. And then at the end of the episode, when him and Laren are like embracing and he asks her to marry her, he's like, I don't have a ring, but he presents her a raven's feather.
Oh, that's a great detail. Yeah. I thought it was Elminor or something. I don't know if it can work that way, so to speak, but that's a really great insight. I didn't pick up on that.
So I don't really have like a further point to make beyond this. Like, but I just think that maybe those are two kind of random pieces of flavor to throw in if they're meaningless. So to me, I think the Raven Queen was perhaps his patron. If not literally, that at least he maybe served her. Like that was one of the facets of his character, which I just thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think Brennan even mentioned in the Twitter Spaces conversation of like the level of detail we didn't necessarily get in the episode, but like sort of the backstory there, and that'd be a great like thing that might come up like in a post wrap up discussion. Might even be a great question for people to ask. But yeah, it makes the whole story a lot sweeter as you pick up those little details for sure.
Yeah, and just they're all so great. But like Sam, I don't think it was during the Twitter space. I don't know where else he would have said it, but you know, they were all talking about their characters' like deep flaws and secrets, and he was like, yeah, Loquacious's secret was just that he still really loved his wife.
Yeah.
I was like,
that was great. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
They've been having.
Yeah. We kind of expected them to maybe kind of get back together. And I just like how I think good stories are ones where you like, we think that good stories have to be like subverting expectations, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Like, we kind of thought this would happen, and yet it didn't feel cliche or stereotypical. I mean, I guess it kind of was, in that, it's not unlike anything we've ever seen, but just well acted, well done. That should be, I think, a good encouragement to all game masters out there, in that, your story, and Brendan mentioned this actually in the Twitter space, is like, not everyone needs to have like deep dark pasts and like big secrets. Like, Pasha has 3 big secrets, so Nidus needs 3. Like,
yeah,
being a bit more not so forceful in how it has to be. I think the same thing applies to, it has to be, we have to have big twists. Like, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just needs to be a good story that you just execute on. So
yeah,
I think Loquacious him and Laren kind of reinforce that.
100%. 100%.
Well, I'm mad it's over.
Me too.
I'm excited I get to watch it again tonight, though. So
me too. Hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully. I mean, clearly we're going to keep getting EXUs. So hopefully they just keep delivering on, this high quality content.
Do you think we get any more stories in the Calamity in the Age of Ruin, I guess?
I think so. Eventually, maybe not next, maybe not, for a while, but that's such a ripe, I mean, it's like 100 plus years. Like, that's such a ripe, cool setting to tell a story in. So I think so.
Well, we never got much of a time frame. I know a lot of like pulling like small details from different source books had us put it at least 100 years, maybe 150. But Brennan said it in episode 4 and also in the Twitter Spaces conversation that this calamity lasted for centuries, which may be much longer than people even expected. And he also mentioned in the episode that the eruption of Dominus covers the world in ash and soot for 100 years, which is a very like meteor hitting the planet,
yeah, like nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, so there might be even like a much longer story that we've realized. So
yeah, and I mean, clearly, I mean, I don't know the lifespans of bird people, but we know Serret's alive, so it'd be interesting to see kind of what his trajectory is here from this point. Not that I would expect him to like show up in campaign 3, but maybe one of his descendants or something. Yeah. And what's also as cool is that Pasha's sphere is out there, which we know that not literally everything, but most of everything was lost to like the history and the technological advancements and everything was all lost to time. So that leads me to believe that either the sphere is lost or someone has it, but like is safeguarding it. Like they didn't share that knowledge with the world. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe, I mean, that's like a juicy, it's Chekhov's gun almost,
Bro, like, you just took the word I was going to say. It's way too much of a Chekhov's gun to not get brought up again. And I've seen some people refer to it as like, maybe it's within the Cobalt Soul, which I didn't know anything about this, but that seems to line up for me. But I think definitely is out there somewhere. Maybe Hydroga has a museum number 2 with a fake scrying orb. So
yeah, so hopefully maybe, I don't think we're going to get like a direct sequel to this. Well, I mean, everyone's dead except for Sarah anyway, but I think we could maybe get another story set during this era. But then we could also just see some ripple effects from this. Like maybe we find that orb. Maybe we see Champion of Hell Xerxes show up or, mentioned in some way. So I'm excited for that.
It's interesting that this is kind of the last thing I wanted to say. It's interesting that Ruidus is never mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Calamity.
Oh yeah. I'm glad
it's
you said that.
Never mentioned, and yet we know that in the lore within modern day Exandria, there are references, theories around people being Ruidus touched, like born under the solstice of Ruidus. I said that's not correctly phrased, but and they even mentioned how maybe the matron of ravens was born under it, kind of Ruidus touched. Interesting that this is never mentioned in Calamity, which makes me wonder if this is something like, you know, stories that get made up and then proliferate and become like presumed history. I do wonder if Ruidus is somehow tied to the Calamity in some way.
Yeah, me too. Because it may just be that it wasn't mentioned. There was no need to mention it. You know what I'm saying? So maybe it's there, and just off screen, if you will, or maybe it didn't exist yet. You know, and the Calamity did cause it, or something else. I remember I think I texted you this. Like, what if the Primordials? She was able to successfully like move them off Exandria, but wasn't able to get them all the way extraplanar, and so maybe they're like trapped in Ruidus in space. That didn't end up being the case. But I was excited for that possibility for a moment. But yeah, I'm super interested because I think Brennan at one point, again, I don't remember the exact context, but he was talking to somebody about like, I don't know, but he mentioned the moon singular. And I was like, is that intentional? Like, in meaning there is no Ruidus yet? Or was that just, you know, it's a very small detail that would be easy to, you know, flub. Yeah, that's just a long-winded way to say I'm with you. Like, I wonder, I'm very curious about that. Like, was Ruidus there? Was it caused by the Calamity? Was it caused by something post-Calamity that just still we haven't been, you know, familiar with? Something's going on with it, one way or another.
Yep. Well, the bar has been set, Matt Mercer. Let's see what you can do. But she's like, I've already done 2 campaigns. That's awesome. All right. Well, there's my kid screaming in the background. EXU Calamity fam, let us know what you thought about it. If you loved it, if you hated it, hopefully you didn't.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to mention, Will?
For those of you that did come over from D20, like I said, I talked with a couple of you about this, but not all of you, I'm sure. We'd love to hear your recommendations for where we should start checking that out. I think, and again, I don't know anything here, so correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but I don't think there's any shared continuity between them. So I think it really doesn't matter where we start. But I think Crown of Candy or something a lot of people have mentioned. But anyway,
I heard that one. There was another one that I heard, but I just don't have it in front of me. But yeah, I did hear that one.
Yeah. So hit us with your recommendations, and you D20 people, come check out Campaign 3. I mean, you know, I know Brennan's not in it, which I think that's basically who you guys came over for, but trust me, it's good. You won't regret it. And we got recaps on our channel if you just want to catch up quick and start watching live with us. So
yeah, we need to do a recap, by the way, of episodes 1 through 24. I think.
Yeah.
Just before it kicks off next week.
Is it about to be 25?
It'll be 25. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Because it's been off for 5 weeks. Will be 5 weeks. So we'll be 6 weeks actually by the time it comes back. So, all right. Thumbnail.
Oh man.
I think maybe just tears or something. We could do that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm game for whatever.
I'm down with just being super sad.
Okay.
You know, the episode's very sad, and it's sad that it's over. So, sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, check out our Twitter at the Pixelists, and don't be a stranger. And catch SGDQ next week.
Oh yeah, Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we got a one shot tonight. I don't know. Are you watching?
I won't watch tonight because we're watching episode 4 of Calamity tonight.
Okay. So yeah, we got that to look forward to as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll catch you later, guys.
Bye, y'all.